Welcome back to the Health Longevity Secrets Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Robert Lufkin. Our guest today has set out to accomplish something that decades of research and billions of dollars from the top pharmaceutical companies in the world have failed to do, and that is reverse Alzheimer's disease. And he proposes to validate it with what is the gold standard of evidence-based medicine, the randomized controlled clinical trial. Matthew Phillips MD is a full-time clinical and research neurologist at Waikato Hospital in Hamilton, New Zealand. His foremost passion is to explore the potential feasibility, safety, and efficacy of metabolic therapies, particularly fasting and ketogenic diets, in creating alternate metabolic states that may improve not only the symptoms, but also the function and quality of life for people with a variety of difficult disorders. And now, Matthew Phillips, MD. Hey, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me.
I have to say I share your vision about what you've stated in the past about exploring potential therapeutic benefits of metabolic strategies, particularly fasting and ketogenic diets in addressing our most challenging chronic diseases. I have to say I also admire your courage in that you have set out to accomplish something that decades of research and billions of dollars from literally the top pharmaceutical companies in the world have failed to do, and that is to demonstrably reverse Alzheimer's disease and show those changes. And you propose to validate it, as we'll see as we talk about this, with what is literally the gold standard of evidence-based medicine, and that's a beautiful randomized controlled trial, at least in the pilot studies. And this is very early, but I can't wait to hear about all this. But before we dive into that, maybe you could just take a moment and tell us a little bit about how you came to be interested in this fascinating area.
Sure. Okay. Well, I've said this story a few times, but I guess I can always put a twist on it. So I'm a clinical neurologist by training. I'm Canadian. I trained in Australia for 12 years. And when I finished my neurology training, which is a long road, as you would know, I wanted to specialize in a therapy. So I wanted to specialize in something, but I wanted it to be a therapy rather than a disease. And the only real options were diseases, so stroke or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's and so on. And I didn't want to just confine my thinking to one disease. And also I didn't want to just specialize in how to mask the symptoms of a disease. So I was a bit frustrated, and I bought a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I just decided to sell absolutely everything. I sold everything, even my computer and my phone. I had no computer, no phone. Landed in Buenos Aires. I had booked 3 or 4 days at a hostel somewhere. And I just thought, I'm just going to let life do with me as it will. So I started that, and it turned into an adventure, as things often do when you don't have a plan. And during the next year, I was able to really think hard away from the hassle of, being on call and answering phones and just being stuck in a hospital where many doctors think the same way because we're all trained in similar models of thinking. I was able to think about different things, ways to maybe approach a disease and, from a therapeutic perspective that could actually do more than just mask the symptoms. And it was a long search. I didn't latch onto fasting or ketogenic diets right away, but eventually I got there, and it actually took 3 years. So I did a bit of work and volunteering for the next 2 years after that year. And that's what I landed on. Is, to me, it seemed the most, and I was objective about this. I resisted it initially. I didn't want to be fasting or keto. I didn't know anything about them. It sounded kind of silly in a way, but objectively and mechanistically and evolutionarily, that is what I landed on. Those two therapies in particular as the most potentially beneficial for a broad range of disorders related to lifestyle. And so that is it in a nutshell. But yeah, it was a 3-year sort of self-induced fellowship, if you will.
And then from there, you wound up in New Zealand, where you are now, correct?
Yes, I'd always wanted to come here to work. I visited here a couple times. I love the place. I love the people. I love the mountain scenery. I miss the mountains in Australia, being from Western Canada. And I decided to stay for a year, check it out. And then we started the Parkinson's study. I got the ethics approval for that. I couldn't believe I got it. And we started to sort of get patients interested. I thought that was pretty neat. And, 1 year turned into 2, turned into 3, and now we're looking at almost 6. So here I am, and here we are.
So fasting and ketogenic diet, what was your underlying thinking about that, or how does that all fit together?
These things, I think in my own thinking, it wasn't like I had a single aha moment. I mean, you do have a few of those, but it's been a journey where your brain just constantly puts more connections together, and you see how this can possibly help a disorder such as Alzheimer's, or other ones like cancer and atherosclerosis, I think. So, which is the most common cause of heart attacks, as you know. So I guess initially it just sounded weird, and I saw a few people speak about it: Jason Fung, Dominic D'Agostino, Walter Longo, a few other people like that. And I just thought that's really intriguing. These guys seem to really know what they're talking about, and they sort of are advocating for this. So I'm going to look into it further. And I looked into it further, and I just noted that, when you do a particular longer fast, or you really remain dedicated to a ketogenic diet, it's doing a whole lot more than just changing 1 or 2 pathways, metabolic pathways within the body. And we learned in med school about, this medication does this and this medication does that. And it's all about being targeted and specific. And we want to be targeting things very precision wise. But fasting keto are the opposite. It's like, it's an orchestra. You're changing a whole ton of things in sort of a non-precise way from a simplistic perspective, but from a more mature perspective, the body is able to, when one thing changes in the body, another thing compensates. And so by orchestrating a massive change through fasting or a ketogenic diet, you're allowing the body you're unleashing this power that it has locked up to make all these changes and regulate them all with each other simultaneously, simply through the cessation of eating or changing how much fat and carbohydrate you eat. And I thought that was fascinating. And when I looked into it more, I saw that maybe, I learned in med school and my earlier degrees that what I learned was that genetics was sort of the big focus, the big area of interest, and that's where we should be looking at to choose gene therapy for Alzheimer's and gene therapy for cancers and so on. But then fasting keto, they were really producing so many benefits for the mitochondria. And now the mitochondria as the mitochondria dysfunction, so where mitochondria are not working effectively, and as you know, they make almost all the energy for most of our cells. When they're not working, bad things happen. These disorders have a chance to progress. When they are working well, I don't think the vast majority of these disorders, these lifestyle-related disorders, which are the big ones, have much of a chance to progress, or you would at least slow them down a lot. So to me, it's all about orchestrating huge changes within the body's metabolic machinery to help protect and enhance mitochondria function. And that is a huge sort of amount of mechanistic thinking, if you will, that I'm trying to summarize in 5 minutes. But that's it in a nutshell.
And how does fasting or ketosis, how does that help the mitochondria, help this mitochondrial dysfunction?
Okay, so I mean, I view fasting and keto, the mechanistic effects, as an iceberg. You sort of see a few of them at the top, but then the deeper you go, the more there is. So the ketones, which are energy molecules produced by both methods, are the most obvious aspect of them in a way. And the ketones, when you fast, your body will create ketones from your body fat. When you have a ketogenic diet, it's quite similar, I think, but the ketones are coming from, a lot of the ketones are coming from the fat you eat in the diet. So either way, the body's turning fat, whether it's from your diet or from your body, into ketones. And these ketones are energy molecules like glucose. And glucose is what most people on a modern diet run on pretty much all the time. But ketones have benefits. So benefits include greater energy efficiency. So they will produce more energy per ketone than a glucose molecule. They will also produce fewer free radicals. And I think that, or reactive oxidases, free radicals, call them what you will, that's important because the body is okay with a certain amount of that, but after a certain point, it becomes damaging. The ketones also have a number of signaling functions that we're finding out. They can actually affect how DNA creates proteins and what proteins are created. So they can help turn down certain proteins that may not be beneficial or desired from an aging stance, and they can help turn on proteins that may be desired. So these ketones have many functions, and the deeper you go, and the ketones, well, I'll leave it at that. The other thing that I guess deeper you go is that fasting and keto, they induce the mitochondria to actually repair themselves and undergo this phenomenon called mitochondrial biogenesis, whereby they divide and can actually grow within the cell and thereby produce more energy. And another thing they do when you do these fasted ketogenic diet is the mitochondria have a chance to undergo mitophagy, which is a form of autophagy, which I'm sure most of your viewers know about. Autophagy is cell eating, and it's colloquially called cell eating. And it's basically where the cell recycles junky proteins and DNA, and in mitophagy, old, damaged mitochondria. And when you're eating all the time and having a lot of glucose on top of that, sugar, carbohydrates, you really hinder that process. And so fasting is probably the best at this. It basically stops the onslaught of nutrients into the body. It allows ketones to be produced, which are more energy efficient. And it allows the mitochondria a breathing space to actually try to repair, rejuvenate, and undergo biogenesis and remove the old ones that need to be removed and let the younger ones come into play. So those are some of the benefits, just looking at things from a certain number of levels.
So with, oh, excuse me.
No, you
so
go.
With quick thing, let me just see if I summarize it. The benefits from eating a ketogenic diet, being in ketosis all the time, but there's an additional benefit from fasting in addition to the ketogenic diet, and that's the autophagy that's activated. In other words, you could be in ketosis all the time, then why do I need to fast? Well, you need to fast to turn on the autophagy. Is that what you're saying?
Well, nobody knows exactly, and
Right.
Autophagy may not be a switch on, switch off thing like that. But yes, I think that particularly the multi-day fasts more than likely induce autophagy to a far greater degree. The ketogenic diet does, in some animal studies, seem to promote autophagy. But it's like I've always said this: the fasting is like Batman, the keto diet's like Robin. If you really want to induce autophagy maximally, you've got to do some fasts, and really the longer fasts are probably better and more powerful at doing this.
I see. And it seems like there's so many benefits to switching to ketosis as a metabolic system. Should we be in ketosis all the time?
Very good question. So look, there's a lot of people get very supportive, almost religious about the diet, there's diet wars, things like that. To me, the ketogenic diet is not really a diet. It's a way of putting your body in a fasted-like state. So it's a method. It's not a diet. Of course, it's a diet in that you have to eat certain things, but a keto diet can be vegetarian, it can be vegan, it can be carnivore, it can be whatever you want it to be, Mediterranean, Indian, it can be Japanese. It doesn't matter. I've designed and had people on all these different ketogenic diets, no problem. So it's a method. The keto diet's a method. It's a protocol, if you will, if you want to be really scientific about it, for putting the body into a semi-fasted state. So everyone's body is adapted to fasting evolutionarily. At some point in time, our ancestors, no matter where you evolved, went without food for period of time, maybe more if you were in the more northerly latitudes, but you did, your ancestors did. And so therefore everyone is adapted to fasting, and thereby, since the keto diet, really the only special thing is that it kind of makes the body go into a semi-fasted state. Everyone's body is adapted to a keto diet, in my opinion, because it's not a diet, it's a method. And so should people be in ketosis all the time? So if you have a normal body mass index and you're fairly healthy and fit, no, that's not necessary. In fact, I think you should cycle in carbohydrates periodically, particularly if you're going for certain performance states such as power lifters. Power lifters, strictly on fasting ketogenic diet protocol, that might not be optimal. And also, I think depending on where people evolve, so people of, Northern European ancestry, their ancestors would have evolved with far fewer vegetables. They might have been in ketosis a lot longer, maybe most or all the time. And so that might be more reasonable. Certainly people with metabolic syndrome, and that is, metabolic syndrome, which is a combination, I'm sure viewers know, of type 2 diabetes, obesity / being overweight, hypertension, and abnormal cholesterol profile. You've got 50% of the US population pre-diabetic or diabetic, and I think 75% at least is overweight or obese. And basically the vast majority of people in the West are metabolically unhealthy. I think those people should be, I think it would be, I don't think they should be, people have a right to choose always, but I think it would be ideal for them to be in ketosis, certainly most and maybe all of the time, until they achieve metabolic health. And once they achieve a certain degree of metabolic health, it's something you can never perfect, but you always can get better. Then once they're happy with their metabolic health, maybe they've reduced the risk of getting a heart attack or stroke or whatever to a certain degree, then they can cycle in some carbs. So I'm not anti-carb by any means. I'm anti-processed carbs, but I think some people, it would be ideal to be ketosis all the time until they reach a target, and then no longer required.
You and I both come from traditional medicine, medical system backgrounds, and I still work in a medical school and all that. How did medicine get so far off the rails and miss this key point about? I mean, I'm still, and my colleagues, they still treat hypertension with a drug, and then they think they're done, when they're not treating the underlying condition. You treat heart attack with a stent or a bypass and you're done. You might give them advice about lifestyle, but lifestyle is really not considered the powerful game changer that it is. Where did we go so wrong here?
Well, yeah, like you, I do the vast majority of the neurology teaching and training at Waikato Hospital, and I see the medical students all the time. And I try to stick to their traditional curriculum. They have to learn the basic neurology, of course, but also I do mention these things, and I practice them myself with my patients and with myself too. So everyone knows. I find that when you're at a young age as a medical student, you just want to learn stuff, and you don't want to be controversial. And it's difficult until you finish your training, which most people are going to be into their 30s at that point. It's difficult to be too controversial. And then you're in a system, and you're a junior specialist amongst your senior colleagues, and you don't want to be too controversial. And this continues for the rest of one's life. So that once you get on the medical school, the current dogmatic way of thinking, which is, medications, disease, hypertension, give, an angiotensin inhibitor or something, it's very hard to get off it unless you do something stupid like I did and discharge yourself from the system for 3 years and, buy a one-way ticket to Argentina. So where did we go wrong? That's where we're at. We're on this train of medicine where it's hard to think differently. It's very hard. And, every time I come to work, every single day, I do, I encounter that amongst my colleagues, as do you. Where did we go wrong? Maybe 200 years ago, it went a little south when there was this great debate in France between Pasteur and Béchamp. So Louis Pasteur, who was a hero of mine since I was like 5 years old. I had a little picture book of Pasteur's success. Pasteur was this advocate for germ theory, and he was a pure scientist. And he just thought, he championed this theory. He didn't invent it. He championed it, though, that germs cause disease. So you get the bacteria or the virus, and it causes this disease, which is a set of clinical symptoms. And Béchamp was a contemporary of his, a little bit older, I think, and he certainly lived a lot longer. Béchamp was actually a physician and scientist, so he had both hats. And Béchamp was quite a gentleman, so he didn't have quite the oratory skills of Pasteur, but also perhaps he was a little more polite. And Béchamp had, anyways, had a different theory. It was terrain or host theory. And he said, well, no, it's more like this. These bacteria and viruses, most of them are scavengers. And if you have a unhealthy terrain, so a weak, diseased body, a sick body metabolically, he didn't say that word, but this is, I'm drawing a parallel into what he may have been alluding to. If your terrain is weak, the ground, the soil, whereby the scavengers sort of, mess around and do what they do, if that's weak, then disease is going to happen because the scavengers will kind of take over. But if the terrain is strong, i.e. healthy, then the scavengers will remain scavengers, and we'll have these bacteria and viruses in our body, and they'll do a little of this, a little of that, but they won't cause disease, as in give you a high fever, make you feel fatigued, make you vomit and have nausea, and all the things that disease does, or Alzheimer's, cancer, and those things, right? So to take it to another level. Not saying those are from infectious diseases, but it's an analogous thing. So his theory was the complete opposite. And they had this debate for decades. And eventually, towards the end of the 1800s, the dawn of the 20th century, Pasteur's germ theory had really taken off. And Béchamp's, for a number of reasons, had really faltered, and it almost faded away into nothingness. Not quite, though. It's been held alive by a few people. So I think maybe where Béchamp's theory had a problem was, I think the health he was referring to, the terrain, he didn't have Pasteur had these targets he could target, bacteria. There's this bacteria that causes this disease, target it with this vaccine and so on. Béchamp didn't have that. He said, things like get sunlight, get exercise, but it was all very vague, and he didn't have protocols because he didn't have a target. He just sort of said this terrain, and what's the terrain? And he came up with some ideas, these microzymas and other funny things that he thought of, which in an attempt to try and make an explanation. And really, we hadn't discovered mitochondria in a big way by that point in time. That was the problem. We didn't know about mitochondria. And so maybe if he'd known about them, he could have said, the target is mitochondrial dysfunction. The mitochondria are damaged. I need to fix those to actually improve a lot of these disorders. So rather than attacking or suppressing or eliminating a bacteria or virus, which is the way we think today in medicine, it was more about restoring a disease target, something that's damaged and needs to be restored, not targeted or suppressed or eliminated. And so since Pasteur lost that debate, Béchamp lost that debate, and Pasteur, basically his theory won, germ theory has taken off. And now it's spilled over beyond all the infectious diseases. Now we think about non-infectious disorders, which are the ones that are killing people in the West today. So atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries, gives you heart attacks and a decent proportion of strokes, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, all these guys. Now these are non-infectious disorders, probably. But yet we're still trying to target, eliminate, and suppress things. So we're trying to target and eliminate cholesterol. We're trying to target and eliminate these proteins in Alzheimer's neurons that even be doing any damage. We're trying to target the mutations in cancer cells, which probably are to some extent just bystanders. And the whole model's, in my opinion, gone off kilter because we're not thinking hard anymore. We're just accepting what we're told when we're in medical school in our 20s. And we just keep going on that train, and life gets in the way, and we keep going and keep going. And then, we're 75 years old, and that's it. So And it really stems from, I think the problem is that Béchamp didn't have the target, the mitochondria dysfunction, and not just him, but other people at the time, that whole host or terrain theory didn't have that things ironed out compared to the germ theory. And so the germ theory took off. And here we are with germ theory absolutely out of control, in my opinion. It pervades our thinking, and we really need to get some common sense back into medicine and relook at host or terrain theory, not the actual theory, but a better, superior theory that takes mitochondria dysfunction into account, a metabolic theory, if you will. And I think that would be a beautiful thing, because then we could actually really start doing some seriously good work in mitigating and reducing Alzheimer's and heart attacks and strokes and cancer. These things should not be as prevalent as they are and killing as many people as they are.
Yeah, and how we conceptualize a disease is very important. If we think of the heart attack is the disease, and the acute narrowing of the blood vessel is the disease, then we miss the underlying cause and it never gets treated. It's sort of like if my roof leaks because it has a hole, I treat the hole, but I don't realize there are termites or something that's causing the hole. And that's almost what's going on with metabolic disease and these underlying disorders that for the most part don't get treated. I wonder if also that we failed in our messaging for lifestyle, the idea of lifestyle, it's become so vague and so confounding. When I was diagnosed with hypertension a couple of years ago, before I got my metabolic health in order and deprescribed my drugs, and I'm fine now. But at that point, I was put on a antihypertensive drug, and I said, "Is there anything else I could do?" And the physician sort of, he did the best he could, and he said something about, well, fix your lifestyle or something, lose weight or exercise or your diet. But for someone to try and take that into actionable items, you look at diet, and there's all sorts of different diet viewpoints, on conflicting viewpoints on the internet and elsewhere, even among physicians. And exercise, it's not a clear message, and it's sort of, it's very very confusing. And for the most part, people don't trust lifestyle, and I think a lot of my colleagues don't trust lifestyle as an effective regimen, when actually, as we're going to hear from you and the other people are showing, perhaps the most powerful medicine we have is literally the diet and when we eat. Fasting, if you fast, you make things happen whether you want to or not, that are metabolically very, very powerful. It's
absolutely, yeah,
not a matter of either or.
Yeah, so to some extent, Béchamp's original problem is still with us, right? We still haven't defined, when we say lifestyle, improve your lifestyle, most people think, oh yeah, exercise more, eat less. And that's just nonsense. Those are two strategies for failing. And that's what most people, doctors included, think, because they didn't get trained any better. So we still lack the target. The target is the mitochondria dysfunction, in my humble opinion. If we think of it that way, always from that perspective, then you can actually start tailoring metabolic programs, metabolic therapies even, for these disorders. And it's like I said, it's so complicated what they're on one level. Fasting is simple to understand. Oh, you stop eating and drink water and salt and all that. But on a deeper level, a mechanistic metabolic level, it's incredibly complex, and it's very hard to design trials that test these things. And also with metabolic things like lifestyle, fasting, keto, it's not like a drug where the change that you expect to see happens right away, right? It takes a while, weeks, months, even really years to optimize things for your metabolic health to improve. And so it's hard to test. You have to do these trials that are, at least in the level of weeks or months, and they have to be designed a little differently for scientific reasons. And yeah, so there are so many challenges, but the challenges are surmountable, absolutely. And imply it's absolutely worth doing it. If you hadn't done what you did, Rob, you might be on 2 or 3 antihypertensives now, and your metabolic health would probably be even poorer. and maybe your blood pressure number would be okay, but you would know deep down, and most of my patients know deep down when they're being sold something by their physicians that things aren't quite right. It's not normal to be on so many medications now at this stage. And, most of the patients I see do suspect deep down that something's not right. And that's the thing that I find fascinating is, people do trust their doctors, but that trust is being eroded the more we cling to this dogma of medicine and drugs and disease, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And the more we cling, the more trust mainstream medicine is going to lose, and more trust will be eroded into the internet, into a lot of alternative therapies, and some of which are okay, but some of which are not. And that's a shame to me. I really want to help mainstream medicine change so that it can adapt and become much more powerful and able to deal with these disorders, because right now we're losing trust and from our patients. I don't like that. It's not the way it should be. So we need to change how we fundamentally view ourselves. I don't want to see myself as a doctor of medicine, in brackets, drugs. I want to see myself as a doctor of health, and drugs can be a part of that. I'm not anti-drug. So I'm not, I think using many drugs in the correct circumstance is absolutely appropriate. But the main game is not the drugs. The main game for most people today with our disorders is fasting, ketogenic diets, and similar metabolic strategies.
Yeah, it's fascinating the way the medical system that we're a part of treats all these symptoms of metabolic disease with very powerful tools that are effective when they're needed. For cancer, heart disease, radiation, surgery, drugs. But the fundamental problem, the metabolic disorder, there's not really a drug for it, or radiation therapy or chemotherapy. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of being that people have to change. And we as physicians and other healthcare professionals need to get our heads around that's equally important to the drugs and the surgery and everything else, that the lifestyle is even more important. It's fundamental and all. Yeah. And now you've taken the step to actually do that with your actually there are two clinical trials that I think are both at least the first in Alzheimer's, and then one also for a related neurodegenerative disease, with Parkinson's disease, that many people are familiar with. Maybe we can start with the Parkinson's one, and you just summarize that, and then we could take a little deeper dive into the Alzheimer's one and sure. See what it looks like.
Yeah, so they were the first randomized trials in either disorder involving a ketogenic diet. So you're correct. And so I got to say also, part of the reason I do these trials is I want to make sure that I'm not full of a dogma that is nonsense too, right? So it's difficult road trying to be enthusiastic. You have to be enthusiastic to get these kinds of things done, otherwise you'll fail. But you have to try and stay objective too, and that's difficult. Anyway, so the Parkinson's study, we did that 3 years ago, and that involved 47 people with Parkinson's, and it was a randomized controlled trial. So there had only been one trial in Parkinson's before that, like 13 years before, in 2005, by a Dr. Ted Van Italy, who is sadly no longer with us. And he looked at, I think, 7 patients with Parkinson's. It was just no randomized aspect, just 7 people, put them on a diet for 4 weeks, see what happens. And he had some encouraging results. So I wanted to make one that was much bigger and had randomized component. Randomized means you have a control group, so they do some intervention would be normally standard of care or recommended. So in our case, it was a healthy low-fat New Zealand eating guidelines recommended diet, and you compare those people with a experimental intervention. In this case, the ketogenic diet. So we put 24 on keto, and 23 were randomized to the low-fat diet. And it was a good low-fat diet. It had a lot of vegetables and fruits and so on. What people would say is good. So, and then we ran that for 8 weeks. So I doubled the time that Ted used, because he had impressive results in only 4 weeks. So I thought 8 would be fine. And money was an issue, because at this time this was getting funding for this kind of thing was not easy. And we ran it through, and that that's a really great trial design. You know, it's really important to do randomized controlled or randomized crossover trials in this kind of work, because otherwise its results are not as powerful as they could be. And even with the best randomized controlled trial design, you still have some things that may not be optimal, but it's as good as you can get.
It's obviously
So,
not blinded, so there's
no,
always that issue too.
that's one
Yeah.
big limitation of a diet trial that people don't get is you can't do a double-blind trial where the assessors and the patients don't know what they're taking with a drug, right? You give them a pill and they don't know what it is. But with a diet, you can blind the assessors, so you can make it single-blinded, which is what we did. So they had no idea what patients are on, but you can't blind a patient to what they're eating. A patient knows if they've drastically changed their diet and it's high fat or full of carb or whatever, right? So you have to realize that it simply cannot be done, and you accept that as a limitation. So anyways, we did that and changed nothing else. Everything else stayed the same. Their medications stayed the same. We made sure they timed their medications the same before and after meals, very important in Parkinson's. We measured them at the same time of day, on the same day of the week with a blinded assessor. We made sure they exercised the same, that didn't change. Everything was the same except for the diet change. And by the end of only 8 weeks, Parkinson's improved in the ketogenic diet. And the thing about Parkinson's, it's a complicated disorder, even more complicated than Alzheimer's in many respects. So you get the obvious symptoms like the tremor and the stiffness and maybe some walking changes and things like that. But most of Parkinson's, the real things that affect quality of life and disable people are these things called non-motor symptoms. So it's things like pain syndromes, mood disorders, particularly depression and anxiety. It's major problems with sleep. It's fatigue throughout the day. It's falling asleep throughout the day. It's problems with the bladder, problems with the bowel. It's so things. It's really tough. And the non-motor symptoms improved by 40%, 41 or 42% in the keto group. They did improve in the low-fat group. Remember, this was still a better diet. The low-fat diet was a much better diet than most of what these people were taking. They were eating beer and ice cream and stuff, as most people do on a modern diet. They improved by 10%. So they still improved, but it wasn't 42%. So a massive difference there with the ketogenic diet. And I found that very encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And
Yeah.
so that was 2 years ago. And then the Alzheimer's diet then started, the Alzheimer's study started right after that. Is that right?
Yeah, so we launched into the Alzheimer's studies shortly after. It always takes like a couple of years to get ethics and funding and get people interested. So advertising in newspapers and things. And yeah, so we started the Alzheimer's. This was a slightly different design. It's actually, I thought it would be easier to recruit people for Alzheimer's because it's much more common than Parkinson's, but actually it was harder. The reason it was harder is people with severe Alzheimer's are stuck in high-level care facilities, and they're not suitable for this because, you know, they're extremely restricted in what they can eat. And then people with very mild Alzheimer's often are undiagnosed. People don't want to know, or they're labeled with mild cognitive impairment, which is a sort of a risk factor stage for Alzheimer's and things like that, and subjective cognitive impairment. And I didn't want those. I wanted Alzheimer's. I wanted to study Alzheimer's. So I was stuck with maybe the bad milds and the not so bad moderates. And so that restricted greatly the amount of people I could recruit. So it was harder than I thought. And partly for that reason, I decided to go to a randomized crossover design, which is the most powerful kind of design. And you can run a trial with even fewer people than a randomized control design. So that was ideal because I knew, I was restricted in how many people I could get. So anyways, randomized crossover design, that one, we extended the time to 12 weeks. And with a crossover, what you do is you split people up into, again, it was a similar healthy eating guidelines, low-fat diet. This time, though, with the Alzheimer's study, we emphasized just recommendations. They stuck to their normal diet. And we, as a true, our dietitians sort of made these, we made these dietitian recommended changes, but they didn't have to take changes if they wanted. So they were recommended to lower the fat and remove certain foods from their diet, stick to what they were on more or less. And then the keto diet was one we designed for Alzheimer's. We ran both groups for 12 weeks. And then we had a 10-week period where everyone just stopped eating either of these, the control or experimental diet, and they went back to their normal diet, completely normal diet for 10 weeks. And that's called a washout. And you have to do that in a crossover to remove all the effects of the previous two diets, whether they be good or bad. And for many reasons, we deemed 10 weeks was sufficient. And I think it was just. And then we flipped people. So the people who were on the control diet did the keto diet and vice versa. And we did it another 12 weeks. So it's a much longer study. And then you compare all the people, because everyone in that trial, all 26 of them, tried both diets. And that's very powerful because now everyone's tried both, and you can compare everyone on keto versus everyone on the other one. And yeah, I mean, the results were good. So the cognition improved, but it wasn't statistically significant quite there. There were some reasons. Again, you always have to think about reasons. I got unlucky with a severe COVID-19 lockdown, which hit us for the last 6 weeks, 5 weeks of the study. But the other two things we looked at were daily function and quality of life. And if you ask people with dementia, what are the most important things to them, it's actually not cognition, it's function and quality of life. They want to be able to do stuff, and they want to be able to have good relationships and quality of life and that kind of thing. So those things improved, and they were statistically significant, but in my opinion, more importantly, clinically significant, as in when something's clinically significant, it's kind of obvious to the patient and or people around them that things have improved. So you can get a statistically significant improvement, but if you have a humongous trial, thousands of people, then you can, even the tiniest improvement that nobody will notice becomes statistically significant. But with these guys, it was clinically significant. And I was not involved in the assessments, but I saw them at the assessments because I was coordinating stuff. And, you know, some of these guys, it was quite remarkable, the improvement. So, yeah, that's what we did in a nutshell.
And the fact that, you know, many people now believe Alzheimer's disease to be a very heterogeneous disease, you know, like people like Dale Bredesen is, you know, is saying, well, there's a mold toxicity component. Some people may have a toxin, you know, neonatal or Lyme disease, those kinds of things, or there may be people with other deficiencies that present with cognitive impairment and may develop into Alzheimer's disease. But so potentially there could be only a subset of these that would respond necessarily to aggressive ketogenic diet and fasting if their problem is a toxin or vascular dementia or some other thing. They might not respond as much to a ketogenic diet necessarily. Right?
Yeah, that's one possibility. I have huge respect for Dale and what he's trying to do. I do see things differently though. So again, somewhat differently. There's overlap. There's definitely overlap. Mm-hmm. I think to me, it comes back to the mitochondria dysfunction being the underlying problem in 90% of Alzheimer's, the rest being a bit genetic and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so I look at it as mitochondria dysfunction primarily. And if you are doing these therapies correctly for someone, then mitochondria dysfunction should improve. Now, that being said, many different things can cause or trigger mitochondria dysfunction, right? So it's not just excess carbohydrates all the time that can damage mitochondria through free radical mediated mechanisms or whatever. Heavy metals can damage mitochondria. Aluminum, for example, Alzheimer's can damage mitochondria. Infections can damage mitochondria. Viruses, chemo radiation, both of those, carcinogens and radiation can damage mitochondria. So all those things that he talks about can also damage mitochondria. And so, I think that there is a lot of overlap. We may just be interpreting things a little bit differently, but there's a lot of synergy. And the other thing I would say also is, yes, perhaps for certain people, the mitochondrial dysfunction arose primarily from an infection or exposure to something that a diet or fasting strategy won't immediately fix. And maybe that kind of person won't respond as well. I agree. But they should, in theory, if this theory is correct, what I'm thinking of, most people certainly should have some improvement. And that's why it's important to look at larger numbers and randomized trials to actually tease out whether that's the case. And that was the case in this trial. I looked at all the people, how much they improved, and there were less than the number of fingers on my hand that didn't have an appreciable improvement. And I've been thinking about why those few people didn't. I've got some theories, but again, there's always a few things you can't explain. So, yeah, I think there's overlap with his way of thinking, but there's also some important differences.
Mm-hmm. And what's been the impact of your work? How have you seen that influencing colleagues or what?
Yeah, no, well,
what's the impact?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too, Rob. So the impact has been, and I'm not surprised at all. I mean, when the paper came out, it was the second most popular paper ever published by Alzheimer's Research and Therapy, which is the second highest impact factor Alzheimer's journal. So a very good journal. Wow. Yeah, and it remains the number 2 most sort of measured by a altmetric score, which looks at things like Facebook mentions, tweets, newspaper articles, videos, like something like. So that's really good. So a lot of people are interested. That being said, amongst the mainstream, my mainstream colleagues, it's more like, it's kind of like, interesting. That's sort of the comment I get. And it's just too different. It's too far removed from the paradigm, the dogma. It's hard to conceptualize why this might have an impact. And I'm totally okay with that. In fact, I don't want to receive a lot of fame or whatever, because I think there's just too much work to do to do more. So it has been, I guess, in one sense, achieved a lot of attention from the groups of people that you'd expect it to achieve attention from. But for mainstream doctors, it's still lukewarm, and I'm totally fine with that. Now, I've done some talks for for example, the New Zealand GP College of GPs. I've done podcasts for them, and I'm going to be. I've done some talks for them. So GPs, actually, of all the mainstream physicians, are the most interested, and so that seems to be gaining traction amongst those guys. Amongst specialists, though, it's going to be a little more work to do. But again, I'm okay with that. I don't want to be. I'd rather just do the work and do the science, and try to do things the best they can. And if the truth is in there somewhere, it'll come out, and I'm cool with that. It doesn't matter if I'm 80 years old and it happens. Fine.
Hopefully, it won't be that long. Well, are there people reproducing that? Are you aware of studies that are larger studies? Do you have another one underway?
So what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to specialize in the therapies. It's great being a general neurologist, because that means I have many diseases or disorders to choose from. So I've done this in Parkinson's, done this in Alzheimer's. Now I'm trying to work on cancer. We're working with patients with glioblastoma multiforme, which is the worst brain cancer you can get. It's pretty tough. And it's very different from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. No less challenging, but it's different. So that's where I'm working with now. I've got a few people with other disorders, so Huntington's and muscle dystrophies that I'm working with that are trying these strategies. And I've spent, because New Zealand's been in a lot of lockdowns the last year and a half, I've been working very hard on a review paper that talks about the whole Pasteur versus Béchamp way of thinking, that what you and I have been discussing for the last half hour. So that's where I'm focusing on. In terms of a big randomized controlled trial, I don't have anything in the works at this moment. I would like to, but the threat of lockdown here is too great. Lockdown can really make a randomized controlled trial difficult. So I'm waiting until things get better from a C19 point of view.
I mean, you think from just in the face of it, if I had a loved one or, a family member or, even, non-physicians, non-healthcare people hearing about the work you did, what have you got to lose by switching to a ketogenic diet? There's really no downside, and ketogenic diets are not that tough. or
No,
not a
if you
diet, but a ketogenic lifestyle. I'm sorry.
no, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
method. You can call it diet. I don't mind. I
Method.
call it.
Yeah.
Uh, absolutely. If you do it right, I think a lot of people try it maybe without the right guidance, or they try some diet they saw on the internet, and it's really the basics that are so important. So water and salt are two things that are, especially salt. It's so important to maintain those things. You have to increase them. If you don't do that, you're going to get a lot of the symptoms that people get, like fatigue and dizziness and headaches and so on. It guaranteed. So, but if you do these things, it's not difficult. And it's not difficult because you're just doing something the body knows how to do, which is go into a fasted or semi-fasted state. We've just forgotten with our modern lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, and having said, going back to our conversation about how, lifestyle, or how metabolic disease, metabolic health is basically driven by lifestyle, and there's not going to be a drug that drops down to, fix it for us, or a surgery even. Having said that, looking at some of the new understanding of the drivers for fasted versus non-fasted state, and the nutrient sensing proteins and genes like mTOR and AMP kinase. What do you think about rapamycin for Alzheimer's patients as a way, I mean, in addition to a ketogenic diet maybe, but really driving things over?
Yeah, so again, that's where I might differ a little bit from like Bredesen approach, which relies on supplementation to a degree. And I'm not against supplements, but I'm not for them. The reason is the reason is this: like, I would rather suppress mTOR, for example, through a fasting or keto strategy as part of the orchestrated change, as the body does it on its own in conjunction with other things, rather than trying to target AMPK or mTOR or insulin or whatever with any drug, and I mean supplement too, either one, because whenever you change one thing, other things compensate in the body just fiddles, when you fiddle with it, it changes things. So I'd rather just induce a state that the body knows how to do and how to coordinate itself, and get the body doing that way. That being said, I'm not against people using supplements at all. If they want to use them, fine. I don't advocate them, though, for that reason. The other reason is a lot of supplements are costly, and I find a lot of patients are really looking for anything when they have things like glioblastoma or Alzheimer's, anything that'll help, and they're susceptible to paying large sums of money on the internet to get these things. And I don't like that. So I always say to people, look, if someone's going to make money out of it, like, I make no money out of this at all. So I just say, look, if someone's making money out of it, you just got to think maybe they've got another motive that isn't entirely pure and directed towards improving your health. And that, by the way, is a problem with a lot of scientific studies today, is financial conflicts amongst the people doing the studies, and drug companies in particular that promote the studies. And that's a different topic. So I don't think we need to talk about it if you don't.
Absolutely. No, that's a very important point. And I guess, and both the good news and the bad news is a ketogenic diet, a ketogenic program can be cost neutral. In other words, it doesn't have to cost more than your other foods that you eat. And fasting will actually save you money.
Big time. Yeah, they're so handy that way. It's keto diet that we've designed. I made sure that every single ingredient was available at our local pack and save food store. And of course, I've tested it all the recipes myself. And it depends how someone eats. If someone tries to eat, quote unquote, well, then our keto diet was really no more expensive than any normal diet. But if, a highly processed carbohydrate diet tends to be cheaper, because processed carbs are kind of on the cheap side. And it worked out to be about 25-30% more expensive than that kind of, which I would say is terrible diet. And if you're not going to spend money on this kind of health oriented program, to me, that's the best thing you could spend it on, period. So we had some people on receiving payment benefits in these trials, who really have no significant income at all, and they could still afford it. So I think that's great. You have to, if you're doing these things, you know, and this is again a problem with, I won't mention any names. Some therapies, therapeutic approaches to Alzheimer's, is they cost a lot, and you know, you can't have a therapy that only 5% of the population can actually afford. To me, that's not so cool. So that's what I love about fasting and keto. If you do it right, they're really not expensive. And as you say, Rob, fasting saves you money and time in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, and well, maybe in the last couple minutes, as an expert in fasting and ketogenic programs, I'd love to hear, and our audience would love to hear, if you be kind enough to share with us what personal choices you make in your life that you feel create a healthy lifestyle for you.
All right, so for me, it's all about the mitochondria. Remember, so I first of all, I'm on first principles, so a lot of my knowledge comes from actually my choices. So I try something myself before I even think about subjecting a patient to it, and I try it to the 10th degree. So so that includes, you know, very long fasts and all the rest of it. So what I do right now, constantly thinking about mitochondrial health. And again, I make a distinction between health and fitness. So health is the ability to have your mitochondria be functioning optimally, ward off disorders, things like that. Fitness is the ability to run fast or be really strong. And that's important. And I do focus on that, but it's mostly health, I think, is the most important thing. So I do OMAD for the last, and it's always changing, but for the last year or so, I've been doing OMAD, 1 meal a day. It's usually dinner. I'd rather it was lunch, but just because of the way my lifestyle is, work, I can never get a lunch at work that I want, and I don't want to take the time in the morning to make it. So it's a as early dinner as I can make it, which never is before 6 o'clock, unfortunately. And it's a strict ketogenic diet. So I'll have a 1 meal a day ketogenic diet. That is, I range it from pure carnivore sometimes to a mix of veg and carnivore, and sometimes I go vegetarian. I have some lovely vegetarian recipes. It doesn't matter, as long as you're keto. And once every 1 to 2 months, I will do a 4 to 5 day fast. I'm doing one right now, actually. So that I think is good to just do a nice reset. And when I do that, I feel so great. And you know, that periodic reset's important. I was doing longer fasts. I was doing 7 to 14 day fasts every couple months. And I found those when I got into the second week, I didn't feel quite as good. I still felt pretty good, but I'm preferring the 4 to 5 day ones. That's just for me. It might not be the best for someone with you know, metabolic syndrome. I think the longer fast might be very good. And in terms of the fitness, so water and salt, I make sure I drink lots of water and have lots of salt, and my blood pressure is very low despite huge amounts of salt. It's somewhat of a myth if you look at the data that high salt is in any significant way contributory to hypertension. From the fitness side of things, all I do, you know, I used to play lots of sports and running. I don't run anymore. I've decided to do HIIT, high impact training. And it's just body weight, biometric, isometric. So at home, and I do that for 5 to 10 minutes every morning, 5 days a week. That's it. And I find I get a really good workout from that. I produce some lactate. And a lot of people don't know this, is the brain can utilize 3 fuels very well. So glucose is one, ketones is another. That's my favorite. But lactate, when you know, the brain can run up to sort of 20% of its metabolism on lactate. So when you do a high intensity exercise program and you get that burn and your glycolysis in your muscles is going overtime, you go, it's lactate. Well, guess what? Your brain's loving it. And that may be one reason people feel somewhat euphoric and think very well in the hours after a good exercise session. So I do strongly encourage to do your exercise if you want to augment these fasting keto strategies. That's it in a nutshell. I don't do anything too crazy out of those things.
Do you use breath breath monitors for ketosis or keto mojo or any of the strips, any of those things, or CGMs?
No, I've tried them, but
Uh-huh.
I'm a fan of the blood glucose keto monitors. So I've got a whole I've got a whole bunch of those, and yeah, I used to measure my ketones sort of twice a day religiously 5-6 years ago when I was really experimenting hard on myself. And now I rarely measure them because at the time I didn't know what my ketones were. It was hard as heck to predict, but now I have a good idea, and I check them once in a while just to make sure, yeah, okay, they're at a certain level, but I don't measure my ketones too much anymore.
Oh, great.
Very important though when you're starting. Very important when you're starting. Otherwise, you don't know if you're doing things right. And that's one thing we did in the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's trials is we had every patient measure their ketones themselves every day. And that's the best way for people to know, because people get competitive in a good way. If the ketones aren't high enough, then they can talk to me and I'll go, okay, well, it's this or that that's causing you the trouble.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're very useful.
Yeah, that's very useful there. So how can people follow you, Matthew? Could you tell us your website? Maybe just tell us so the listeners can hear it now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's a website that a patient started for me a few months ago. I'm eternally grateful to her. It's metabolicneurologist.com. If you go there, pretty much all of the studies are there. I've got some other videos, podcasts, anything I've done. So like this with yourself, I'll put there when it's done. I've got some plans there, some fasting keto plans if you want to try them. I've got, including the ones we use in the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's study. There's a few interesting things there if you want to do this, and yeah, go have at it.
Great. Well, Matt, thanks so much for spending time with us today. I'll let you go back out into that gorgeous New Zealand sunshine today. But thanks for spending the time with us and telling us about the fascinating work you're doing, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks, Rob. I really appreciated speaking to you. It was, you let me speak a lot, so that was nice of you. But thanks for everything you do in spreading the good word and getting different opinions out there on how we might be able to make things better for humanity in the future.
Note, this is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking of it because of something you have seen here. If you find this to be of value of you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support the work we do on this channel. Also, we take your suggestions and advice very seriously. Please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll hope to see you next time.